Okay.
Okay, Robin, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Wanda. You'll just need to make sure you speak clearly because I'm only hearing you through the laptop speaker, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah, as long as we're all very quiet. Okay, so basically, Catherine Eklund collected data in 2018 from 2016 of all of the greenhouse gas emissions that were a result of everything happening within the city limits of Red Lodge. So this is very similar to what the city did, but with the city greenhouse gas inventory, we were only looking at city operations, city buildings, our fleet vehicles, the wastewater, water treatment plant, things like that. So this is including every residential building, every single commercial building. So that's nonprofits, that's the hospital, that's also the city buildings within city limits. All of the transportation going through town. So visitors and employees and locals, everybody driving back and forth on 212 gets counted with that. Our solid waste and our water and wastewater treatment. And so basically just to kind of recap on that overview. This is the first step towards making a plan to lower emissions. So there's 12 communities in Montana that have used a baseline assessment to create some sort of a community climate action plan or energy conservation plan. The city has done it before, but only limited to city operations. And so I actually want to give a little quiz. It will be brief. So I just want to see. I'm curious, and you'll remember it a lot better if you think about it. I'll read it out for those joining online. I'm just gonna turn that off. Jeff, I'm sorry, this is the third time you're hearing this, so I apologize. But basically, there are 5 main sectors within the Red Lodge city limits responsible for our 2016 community greenhouse gas emissions. Now, what I would like you to do is do your best shot to match each sector to its slice of the pie chart below. So each of those sectors is responsible for a certain percentage of our community greenhouse gas emissions. And then the second one will be your best guess at our waste diversion rate. I'll give you like 20 more seconds. And for the second one, the waste diversion rate, that's just the percentage of waste that we recycle instead of sending to the landfill. And the Montana average is 17%, and the national is about double that at 35%. You'll get a gold star. All right, I'll go ahead and wrap it up just in the interest of keeping this under an hour. What do we think this biggest chunk is at 45%? Go ahead and shout out your guesses. Oh yeah, cool.
I didn't hear what she said. What?
Teresa guessed water and wastewater.
But this, I
Okay.
thought it might be residential.
Okay, Wanda and Corey both think residential. Gloria, did you have a guess? Yeah. Okay, cool. So if this were a lottery kind of a system, Wanda and Corey would be the ones winning. So it is residential energy that has this biggest. How about the second biggest here? Now knowing residential is the largest.
Commercial.
Wanda says commercial. Yeah. Yeah. So basically those two biggest chunks, biggest one is residential, second biggest is commercial energy. And then the next at 10%, we have transportation emissions. And then we have solid waste, and the smallest is actually water and wastewater.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you for entertaining me with that one. And with our waste diversion rate, what did we think? How much are we recycling? Okay, cool.
25?
No, 14 is, yeah, a smaller number is going to be worse because it means that we're recycling less. Yeah. Okay. And Wanda said 25. Yeah. So I hate to burst the bubble. It's actually only 4%.
Oh my gosh.
Which I'm just gonna skip ahead in my slides here. So it's 4%, but this is the data that I was working with to come up with that percentage. So it's by no means an exact science or an exact percentage, but yeah, we're looking. So this is just like a whole lot of information to show you that this is the logs that they were keeping at the recycling center for the poundage that they were recycling, and so it's very much a rough estimate. I don't expect you to synthesize all of that information. I definitely didn't. Okay, so I'll go first with a colorful executive summary. Just to recap, the emissions are the graph on the right there. So residential is biggest, then commercial, transportation, solid waste, water, and wastewater, for a grand total of about 20,800 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. So that doesn't mean that that we only emitted carbon dioxide. It just means that every single warming gas that we emitted was converted into the carbon dioxide equivalent so that we could mash it all together and measure it all in one go. And the methodology, we purchased iCli software, which is from local governments for sustainability. And so we could just input energy data and data from our wastewater lagoons and the annual vehicle miles traveled. And then the software would do all of the work with converting that to greenhouse gas emissions for us. Everything is from 4 years ago, from 2016, and everything is limited to just city limits. And there's multiple scopes of emissions included in the analysis, and I just have a little explanation of what that means. So there's 3 scopes. Scope 1 basically just means that the activity that caused the emissions all happened within city limits. So that might be exhaust from a car that's getting emitted straight into the atmosphere in Red Lodge. But there are also activities happening within city limits that don't necessarily mean that they're emitting within the city. So that would be energy provided by Northwestern Energy, something like that. And then scope 3 emissions are a lot more difficult to track, but they are still resulting from activities within the city. So a good example of that would be waste that we're sending to the Billings landfill. Obviously, we would still be responsible for those emissions because we're the ones producing the waste, but all of the emissions are happening way outside of our geographic boundary. So that is still included, but there are also more scope 3 emissions that we just didn't have the data to analyze. And so all of these numbers are definitely just going to be a rough estimate because there's a lot of variables at play here. And so just to give a brief summary for residential energy, the majority of the emissions are from natural gas, and with 40% coming from electricity. The per capita emissions on here are around 7 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per household. And part of the reason why our energy use per household is higher than the average. So the energy use is like 97 million British thermal units of energy, which is just, you don't need to know what that means. It's just how much energy we're using. So we're at 97. The Mountain North average is 84, and the national average is 77. So we're a bit higher. There's those lines that are 10% intervals, so it could be anywhere within those lines. But basically, I think the reason for this, my theory, would be that there are a lot of second homeowners in Red Lodge that are still using heating year-round, and that would be why our natural gas usage is higher than our electricity. That too, yeah. But that's why I put in the Mountain North too, because that should be a similar environment to Red Lodge there. Yeah, and in the greenhouse gas inventory, there are references for all of these numbers too, with different studies and stuff for the year 2016. Yeah.
I didn't know the city.
Yeah, exactly. And it's using the same software with that report, and it's basically doing the same thing, but this is just everybody in Red Lodge. Yeah. So now going over to commercial energy, a little bit lower in terms of overall emissions. Most of it comes from electricity, with only 30% from natural gas. One thing that I think is more salient, though, than just the overall emissions, that the per capita, so again, this is including every single building that's not residential. So that's the schools, that's nonprofits, that's a hospital, that's all the city buildings. But the per capita emissions for commercial are 15 metric tons of carbon dioxide versus only 7 for residential. So basically, one business or one commercial building implementing measures to reduce their carbon footprint is going to have a lot higher impact on our community emissions than just one household, just because the per capita are that much higher. And I will say that, you know, it was definitely not an equal spread. So probably 30 to 40% of the commercial accounts took up most of this energy use, which makes sense, especially with a hospital. So I got all the data from Northwestern Energy, and they're not attached to any addresses or anything like that. So, and that's just for privacy reasons. So I can't tell exactly who it was. But I know, like, there was one account for commercial that accounted for like 15% of all of the commercial electricity in just one, which probably is the hospital, but I can't say for sure. But yeah, if there was a way to figure out who the biggest users were of this energy, that would be super useful with mitigating that. But I mean, it's a small town, and so I feel like you can sort of guess which ones are going to be the biggest buildings and stuff like that, which is helpful. Any more questions on commercial energy before I move on? So transportation, again, this is every single vehicle that travels through 212. It's data that's collected by MDOT. And so most of this is coming from gasoline transportation, about 20% from diesel, and then there's a tiny little sliver that comes from the airport. And we just measured that by seeing how much fuel they were using. Apparently there's only one company that gives the airport fuel, so it was just a matter of asking them how much they sold them in 2016. And basically the annual vehicle miles traveled was 4.8 million miles, which includes, again, all locals, all commuters, all tourists and visitors coming through town. Caveat to this, they wouldn't be able to tell if a gasoline vehicle is actually an electric vehicle. And so I'm hoping next time this inventory is taken, we'll be able to include all of the miles that were fueled with the electric vehicle charger stations and then subtract that out from the total emissions. And I just didn't include it in 2016 because the chargers got put up in the second half of the year, and I think they only fueled like 1,000 miles or something like that. So solid waste. Again, a very sad waste to diversion rate of just 4%, with 96% getting sent to the landfill. It's not a higher scope of the greenhouse gas emissions on that full chart up in that top corner, partly because the Billings landfill has a methane collection system. But I will say that greenhouse gas emissions are not the end all measure for sustainability. Obviously, increasing that waste diversion rate is going to help the landfill out a lot. Right now, they're slotted at the current rate to be completely full in the next 50 years. And recycling measures definitely could be increased. And then this is just a little how we compare. So the Montana average is 17% and the national average is 35%. And then just, I'll skip through this again, but this is where I was getting that data from. And this is also from when the city still ran the recycling program. And I do know in 2019, our waste diversion rate went up to 5%, and the total tonnage went down too. So we are looking better than 2016. So water, wastewater, most of these emissions came from electricity and natural gas use with treatment. And these numbers are the exact same that are in the city baseline inventory, and it's from the same year, so we just pulled that data. And I'm pretty sure we all know this at this point, but it's good to just remind that 45% of the water in the spring is estimated to be stormwater going into the wastewater treatment plant, which is a huge waste of energy. It wastes like $10,000 a year to treat it like wastewater, because it really doesn't need to be treated in the same way. And another fun number, 40% of the treated fresh water in Red Lodge is lost on its way to the home or business. And so, you know, we're working on a water PUR that will be finalized in the next coming months. We have a stormwater master plan. We have plans to fix these numbers, but this is a problem for, you know, it's increasing our community greenhouse gas emissions, and it's also a public safety and health hazard to have this much water being lost and then entering the wastewater treatment plant. So this is sort of the takeaway, I hope, that comes from all of this, based off of population growth estimates from census data and based off of commercial account growth estimates from business licensing records. If we do nothing at all to curb emissions, then we could be looking at a 50% increase by 2050. And based off of Montana climate assessment data, what this will mean for Red Lodge is more variability in our snowpack and potentially more increased rate of a fire season, more bark beetles destroying vegetation and forests. And so this is something that Red Lodge will care about. And I will say too that this is just an estimate. It's based off of growth rates and off of per capita emissions staying exactly the same. And so like every model, it's not accurate at all. I can guarantee that. But it's a good window into the future given no measures to reduce emissions. And just wanted to point out, this is from Montana Smart, or Climate Smart Montana, and they have a working map of every single community in Montana that has developed a resiliency plan. Red Lodge is actually on there for our city energy conservation plan. But there's a couple of good examples of what community climate action plans could look like. And it's something that I won't be able to implement in my time here, but I hope to plant that seed and maybe form a working task force to begin the creation of this plan and help set that up for you guys. Does anybody have any questions?
You said the wastewater treatment plant data was from 2016. Is all the other data from 2016 as well?
Yep.
Why don't we have more recent data?
So part of it is because the software that we purchased was only for 2018, and Catherine had collected all of that data for 2016. And then it sat for a while, and then our membership expired, and then we had all of this data collected that just hadn't been put into a report. And so it just didn't make sense to. Yeah. Yeah, if I wanted to update it, it would have meant an extra $600 to renew the membership, and then also the time to collect all the new data, when the difference of a couple of years, in my mind, doesn't really matter that much. Yes. Yeah. Yep. And again, baseline is about 20,800. And I'll be, yeah, so it's a lot, it's a lot of data. I'll be presenting this to City Council, and from there, we'll have a better grasp of their support for me starting the process of collecting a task force and organizing that a little bit. And then once I do that, I'll post this online, and the finalized version will be up. Yeah.
You already got the baseline for the city.
Mhm.
What is the purpose of creating a baseline for the community? The scope of our work.
So the city's included in this community baseline, and so.
We have a separate baseline already.
Yeah.
We have a separate baseline. But this year we're going to start growing the project into the community.
So I don't think that, I mean, Glory, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that the council would support that necessarily if that's not your resolution. But I think it would be reasonable to have a representative on a steering committee or a task force from Sustainability Board, just to include the aspects of because a lot of the energy conservation plan could be, spread widely. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's not.
No, for sure. Well, and I'm hoping that, like, I got good feedback from Carbon County Resource Council, and I'm hoping that they would be able to, put in the effort to be the leader of that. It could, if the only problem with that would be that these emissions are only City of Red Lodge limits, and so it could include the whole county, but then that would mean we would need to do a baseline for the whole county. Yeah, and the title Red Lodge Community Greenhouse Gas Inventory, maybe it's a little misleading, but I do say in the method section exactly what the boundaries are and what I mean.
Only control.
Right now, we are, we're taking a look at city-owned, and we're not residential, commercial, or anything like that at this point. But this say, okay, you know, the city board and the city finds this, you know, incredibly important and perhaps we look at a city as an entire. Right.
Higher.
Mhm.
And then